Okay, with Dr. Nirenberg.
All right. Good evening. I am Dr. Nirenberg. I had got my master's in mental health counseling, and I got my doctorate at Waldron for counselor education and supervision with a concentration in trauma and crisis. A little bit about myself. I'm a former deputy sheriff, and I worked undercover narcotics. I was also a correctional officer and a sergeant for over 8 years. Um, Unfortunately, due to circumstances, I was forced to change my career, and I always had a passion in helping other people. So I figured, let's go for the mental health counseling. I didn't realize that I was just sentencing myself to another 9 years of school. I tried the general public, but I found that my calling and my passion is actually working in the prison system. They are truly a group of individuals that everybody's thrown away, and nobody remembers them. I've worked mental health. I've worked dual diagnosis in prisons both in Georgia and now in New Jersey. I recently started my own business using telehealth, and I'm just learning that and exploring the new grounds and stuff like that. Let's see. Okay. Well, let me get rid of this here. There we go. Managing mentally ill inmates within the prison system. The prison system has basically become the dumping grounds, so to speak, for mentally ill inmates. Between 1956 and 1996, the state hospitals were closed. So the population went from 550,000 to 61,700 within the psychiatric hospitals. Because of this release, these people were sent into the public, and they didn't have adequate support. So a lot of times what happened was they wound up, committing crimes because they needed to support themselves. Some of them would do drugs and get caught up that way. Others, like I said, committed crimes, and they would go into the criminal justice system. Now, when in the prison system, the inmates tend to have, pretty much the same psychiatric illnesses as the general public. However, there is a greater frequency and intensity. Generally, the most common illnesses that we see within the prison system is depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, personality disorders. There's borderline personality, antisocial personality, and then there's the co-occurring disorders, which is kind of difficult because the inmates, they don't, sometimes they really don't want to admit about having mental health issues. When you identify the mentally ill within the prison system, there's a huge challenge to the prison administration because now they have to make sure that they hire a psychiatrist, they have mental health people on staff. The majority of prisons and jails, more so the prisons, provide a 24-hour healthcare system. I know when I was in Georgia and I was doing mental health care, there were two of us doing the mental health, and out of 3,000 inmates, we had a caseload of, we had 10% of a caseload. Somehow I wound up with the majority of the inmates on my caseload. we wound up having to take call every other week. We would switch, to take call. Um, and it's amazing what happens at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you woke up out of a dead sleep, and you're like 3/4 asleep, and still telling people, moving people within the prison system so you can get people into suicide cells. And then the next morning, you don't remember anything about it. So you want to identify the mentally ill inmates. There are different screening instruments that are used. There's mostly used intake systems, clinical interviews, biopsychosocial, and then some evaluations. So one thing that we have to do is we have to identify the inmates that are not only a danger to themselves, but a danger to others, other inmates, officers, staff, things like that. A lot of times, inmates that are within the segregation units go there because of their behavior. It's a punishment. It's the jail within the jail. And what happens is when they have an officer that is actually doing their job, they don't like that very much. So what happens is they'll go ahead and declare a PREA. Now, what PREA is it's a federal. It's called PREA. It's Prison Rape Elimination Act, and so if there's sexual assault, sexual harassment, or if the officer says something to the inmate and things like that, the inmate can report the officer and say that they sexually harassed them or they touched them or something like that. Now, what happens at times is the inmates will go ahead and falsely accuse the officer of a PREA. So the officer then immediately has to be taken off their post and put on the outside grounds. And that means driving around the prison for 8 hours in a mobile unit, or sitting up in a tower for 8 hours watching an empty fence line, and it gets really monotonous. So once the officer gets cleared and they've shown that there was no PREA that committed, they tend to try to seek retaliation. And what they'll do is they'll notify mental health that an inmate has stated that they want to hurt themselves or they want to kill themselves or something like that. Many of the prison systems these days have a zero tolerance policy. And when a report like that happens, or even if an inmate jokingly says, "I want to kill myself," with the zero tolerance, we have to take that 100% serious. So what will happen is the inmate will be stripped down and put into a suicide cell. He'll be given a smock which is unable to be torn. Usually it's green, and the inmates have nicknamed it the turtle suit. Mental health generally at that time has to determine, if the inmate was faking it to get out of segregation, because, there are two of them within a, 3x6 cell. So you want to see if they were trying to get out of segregation. They want to find out if the officer has falsified information, or if they want to find out if it was actually a true threat. It's been characterized that problems of dealing with inmates within the prison system, there's tension between security missions of the prison and the mental health consideration. A lot of times, the security or correctional officers, their mindset is security first. They're very security oriented, as they should be. Whereas mental health, counselors, substance abuse counselors, we're more people oriented. And we tend to look at how we can help the individual. I tend to have a little problem sometimes. I'll still call them inmates. Where I work, we call them clients. So every once in a while, I'll slip and I'll call them inmates. But I tell them they're my inmates, so I guess it's okay. Some of the times, security will hinder our treatment with the inmates due to contraband issues. They won't allow us. I'm big on journal writing. I believe that they should be able to write journals and stuff like that. And a lot of them ask for journals, the notebooks. We're not allowed to give notebooks or pens or pencils because of security. These things are seen as weapons or potential weapons. There's also within the system itself, there's two sets of rules. There's the rules based by security, and then there's the inmate code. The inmate code is very much different than the security rules. And basically the first rule of the inmate code is never, don't snitch, you don't tell. So, just about anything can happen, and, because of the inmate code, they don't tell. They just, it's a cat and mouse game. Inmate ethics, the mental health inmate, they have a problem. There's a problem with confidentiality because there are times when mental health has to stand literally right in front of a steel door with a half-inch crack and talk to this inmate who's now, having mental health issues, and, the cells are right next to each other. So the person in the next cell can hear, officers walking by can hear everything that's being said. And confidentiality is huge because inmates don't want other inmates to know what's going on. They don't want them to know that they're actually talking to a mental health, counselor or therapist. The other issue is that the correctional system, they have policies where they require the mental health staff to report anything where anything that's illegal, or if there's going to be harm to somebody else, if the inmate that you're talking to is threatening harm to an officer or harm to another inmate or a staff member. With confidentiality, but then you have, our ethics, which is a duty to warn. So you're kind of like stuck in the middle of both sides. Mental health inmates and their behavior, generally they're more likely to act out and act out violently. This causes inmates who are not mentally ill to react to them in a more violent way. Serious assaults, sometimes they'll go ahead and actually rape the mental health individual. And, they become prey to those who are not mentally ill. On the flip side, because that doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes they actually pamper and take care of the non-ill inmates. Will actually look after those who are mentally ill and like baby them, or make sure nobody is going to cause harm to them, or pull the wool over their eyes or anything like that. When, like I said, they try to not tell or allow people to know that they're talking to mental health, because that right there could show that they're weak. that they're, a danger to others, and they can, cause themselves harm, or they can harm others. Now, self-harm is a lot of times they'll just like the prison system, we give them razor blades just so they can shave, and they'll use those blades to cut themselves. A lot of times, the self harm, the mutilation are very slight wounds, slight lacerations, um, and a lot of times it's manipulation to get out of the housing assignment or the segregation unit, or so they're not being, sometimes it's what we call as a check-in move. They owe somebody money or something like that. They'll do a check-in move by cutting themselves, and they'll be taken out of that dormitory and put into suicide watch. It's not impossible to isolate. It is not impossible to isolate mentally health inmates. However, a lot of the prisons are not allowed to do that. They have to keep them in general population because it's unethical. It's against the rules. Just like, we can't put all gay inmates in one pod, can't put all inmates with HIV in one pod. You can't put the mentally health inmates in all in one pod either. Male inmates, they tend to underreport their emotional problems. They don't generally request help until it's gotten to such a point where they're thinking about suicide, or they're having psychotic episodes and things like that. Integrating mentally ill inmates into the prison culture can be counterproductive to therapeutic goals for the inmates. Some prisons have what's called a therapeutic community. And what a therapeutic community is, it's like generally an entire community within one dormitory or one prison. And that's along with the education and medical help and substance abuse and all that. So, correctional officer involvement, it's actually very important to get the correctional officers involved, but proper involvement. They are on the front lines. They see the inmate 24/7, 365 days a week. But like I said earlier, they're very security minded. So their main job is to make sure that nobody gets hurt, nobody escapes, and that there's no contraband within the institution. Safety of the institution is their main goal. Many of the correctional officers that deal with inmates who are mentally ill don't understand and have little training about mental illness and how to deal with the mentally ill and how to de-escalate with the mentally ill. The prison I currently work at, we're a substance abuse treatment facility that's actually a prison. We are a pilot program. We have a lot of officers there. There are times when the officers get a little carried away. And, like I said, it's a treatment facility. So there's mental health there, there's substance abuse there. And there are times when, the inmates will go out to get their medication or whatnot, and you'll hear the officers call them junkies. You'll hear them call them fruitcakes, nut cases, and things like that. Um, it honestly, it makes my skin crawl, and it really irritates me, because it's not all of the officers that do that. There are some that are actually very cooperative with the mental health and the substance abuse system, uh, and they get it. They understand that, this person is another human being. Yeah, they messed up and they're in a prison system now, but they're trying to better their life and learn ways to stay off the drugs and to get back into society. Um, One correctional officer's comments, you need to instill fear in these inmates or they won't listen to you, especially crazy inmates, because if you don't scare them, then they will hurt you. We don't have any way to control these inmates except with behavior modification. See, now, I so don't agree with that. Like I said, I was a correctional officer and a sergeant for 8 years. Um, the way I survived, we had, it was not uncommon for us to have 2 officers and 250 inmates a army barrack style dormitory. Um, so, at any time they could do whatever they want to you. I am a firm believer that you treat me the way you want to be treated, and I will treat you the same way. With that mindset, um, I really never had a problem. Um, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but the mental health inmates did gravitate towards me. Um, and, when I would train new officers, I would talk to them about, having that mindset and how it's easier for them to handle, that a number of inmates, with that mindset. Um, because you don't want to have to deal with an inmate who's off his medication and is having an episode, and you only have 5, maybe 6 officers available. Again, enlisting the officers to participate, it makes a lot of sense. Again, they're there 24/7. Um, the good ones will report to you, say so and so's having a bad day, so and so's mother passed away. They'll give you a heads up as to what's going on. But like I said, on the other hand, you have the inmates, the officers who believe that the inmates, if they seek mental health, they're weak, they're faking it, and things like that. Um, so they also, we want the officers to participate. So because if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Often correctional officers view mentally ill inmates more negatively than that of the general public, the general population, I'm sorry. They will, like I said, they would call them names. They will, um, cause physical harm to them at times. They don't know how to cope with the mental illnesses. They don't understand the mental illnesses. They may have prejudices of their own regarding mentally ill. They themselves may have mental illness and afraid to admit it because in their eyes and through their own training, they are seen as being weak. So now they portray that on the inmates who have mental health issues as being weak. The better the officer is equipped to cope with and handle the special demands of the mentally ill inmates, the easier it is for them. If they know how to de-escalate, that's awesome. The officers will feel more adequately trained, and and the stigma will drop, and the inmates will feel more comfortable going and seeking help. Um, Within the prison system, the mental health workers and the substance abuse counselors and stuff like that, like I said, their main priority is well-being of the mentally ill. Um, they face ethical situations as a result to balance the treatment of the mentally ill and security of the institution. Just because we are therapists and counselors, and what my prison likes to call civilians, and that just gets me, um, doesn't mean that we should not have security of the institution in our mindset either. Um, because if an inmate gets like recently we had to clear out 3-ring binders. An inmate had gotten hold of metal and made a shank or a homemade knife. Um, this is dangerous for not just the inmate population or the officers, but also the staffing as well, because you don't know who that knife is intended for. The inmates don't get pat searched when they come to our offices to talk. So, they may have a grudge against you and, you know, use that knife on you. So, being security minded, plus being, thinking of the well-being of the inmate or the client is sometimes it's kind of tricky. Back in the 1990s, actually that's about the time when I started, was 1990. I started in the prison system. They had what was called gladiator days. Now, gladiator days is when the correctional officers would exploit the inmates, the mentally ill, the gangs and stuff like that, and they would stage fights within an arena. And the arena usually was the rec yard. Um, they were witnessed by other officers. They were witnessed by, brass. They were witnessed by staff members. And a lot of times they would go ahead and bet on the fights as to who would win. Research also suggests that non-specific label effect, which is implying that people labeled mentally ill, regardless of the specific psychiatric diagnosis, are stigmatized more severely than those with other health conditions. And again, I truly believe that's because heart disease is something that is tangible. You can see high blood pressure. You can see diabetes. You can see, if an inmate has cancer, stuff like that. But it's very difficult or you can't see, mental health issues, mental health illnesses. Person says they're depressed. Okay, they're depressed. You're taking their word. It's very subjective. Within the prison system, there are two sets of rules. There's the institutional rules and there's the inmate rules, or the code of silence. And the code of silence, like I said earlier, it's the guide. It guides good behavior of the correctional. Oh, this one, it guides the correctional officers. The code of silence. What is done here stays here. What is seen here, what is said here, stays here. It's also called the blue line out on the street, which is where a lot of officers can get in trouble for. And this code of silence, even as mental health workers, we have to. It's a fine line. I was working in Georgia and my best friend worked segregation. And I was in there, and one of my suicide inmates was in a suicide cell, and he wasn't pulling his arm in from the feed flap. So what eventually happened was they were slamming the steel feed flap onto his arm. And then I call them the goon squad, but the CERT team came, and the head of the CERT team went into the cell, and I don't know what happened. But the next time I checked my inmate, he was rather bloody. So, do I report my best friend, or do I just turn the other cheek? I reported it immediately. And I went straight to my supervisor, and we took care of it. We took care of the inmate, made sure he went down to medical and stuff like that. Amazing enough, my friend, she's still my friend, and she understands. I don't think she realized where she put me. The inmate rules are their code of conduct is different. It's the rules that are enforced by the general inmate population. One that I know we have at our prison is that when a new inmate comes in, the other inmates from the area where they lived will actually chip in and get them started with commissary, with personal hygiene stuff and things like that. So that's actually one of the good codes of conduct. We have a lot of time left. In summary, prisons in the United States, like I said earlier, they have become the holding area for mental health inmates. And one of the reasons is they tend to, on the street, they tend to commit more crimes. Some of the most common illnesses is the depression, the schizophrenia, bipolar, borderline, PTSD. One of the things with PTSD, however, is I've noticed that a lot of the psychiatrists and the intake, they're not wanting to diagnose this PTSD, or that's all they're giving them is PTSD, and they're ignoring some of the other illnesses they may have. As far as co-occurring disorders, a lot of our guys, or most of our guys, would self-medicate. And by self-medicating, they wouldn't, they would numb themselves. They wouldn't have to see the violence that they saw, or the trauma that they experienced, and things like that. And so they would numb themselves. And we have a lot of heroin users who are right now, haven't used for a little while. They are going through different groups, to learn coping skills and things like that. Prison administration, they need to determine which inmates are the mentally ill. And again, that's to lessen the danger to themselves or to others within the institution. One day when I was in Georgia, I had this new inmate in front of me, and I was just getting to know him. And so the way they had my office set up is that there was me up against the wall, there was a desk, the inmate, and the door was right next to the inmate. So in order for me to get out, I would have to hurdle over the desk, beat up the inmate, and get out the door. Which probably would have been impossible. We didn't have any, emergency buttons or any red phones or anything like that. And so I had this new inmate, and so I brought it up on my computer, and across the screen in the red warning section was, this inmate has assaulted numerous female mental health counselors. And so I had to quickly assess this guy, find out where his head is, make sure that I wasn't going to be one of the statistics of him, and things like that. After that, I made sure that my office was changed, because I want to be able to be the one at the door first. There's a serious disjunction between the treatment needs of inmates and the resources available. Like I said, with the notebooks, pens, pencils, different treatments that we may use, the evidence-based treatments and things like that. There are so many of them out there, and the inmates are they're learning to play the system. They know how to get what they want. Like if you leave your pen on the desk and I just so happen to take it, on certain circumstances or certain times, they actually do get over on us and take our pens or our pencils or whatever that we have. So it's important I mean, I know it's bad to say, but they're not in there for missing Sunday school. They are criminals. They are manipulative. And they will get what they want. One thing that we as mental health staff, we have to work past our own prejudices and our own biases. We have numerous sexual offenders within the prison system. We have murderers. We have people who have murdered children, domestic violence, just all the standard crimes. And if we have a hard time working with somebody who is a sexual offender, we have to overcome that. We don't have the luxury of just passing this inmate off to somebody else. So we often have to do self-checks. Again, confidentiality is huge. We don't want to, I know I've pulled inmates out of their holding cells and gone into a medical cell, which is, again, 3x6, and talk to an inmate. I'll close the door and talk to the inmate. Am I putting my life at risk? Yeah, I am. But we get to know the inmates, and you read certain signs and on their attitude and their demeanor and stuff like that. That's when you make your decision as to what you want to do, how far you want to go. I tend to be a little bit more of a risk taker. In Georgia, I had an inmate who, and he was a big guy. He was a very muscular guy. He was one of my mental health guys, and he was having a mental health breakdown. and there were like 4 officers that wanted to spray him with OC spray. And I told the guys to stand down and let me in the holding cell where this inmate was. I said, if I can't calm him down in 5 minutes, then you spray him. And within 5 minutes, I was able to de-escalate the inmate and keep things from going any further. Officers, they don't have the understanding. They don't have the training. They don't realize that de-escalating the situation saves everybody from getting hurt. People label mentally ill, whether it's within the prison system or outside the prison system. And it doesn't matter what their psychiatric diagnosis is. They get, stigma is higher than those with any other type of health condition. And here are some of my references. And I'm going to try and figure out how to get to, I guess I'll press stop share. And that worked. All right. Let's see, look at some of the questions. Breaking the stigma of what it means to be a man. Yes. Yeah, thanks, Kira. That is huge. The inmates, that's one of the most important things with the inmates, is to remain a man in the eyes of all the other inmates. They don't want they don't want somebody to look at them as being lesser. Let's see. Behavioral modification in prisons only increases the frustration for inmates, especially if they already are believing that, yes, if they believe that people are not listening to them, yeah, it does frustrate them. And by frustrating them, they, wind up frustrating the officers, and it just goes on from there. What else did Kira say? In many prisons, they label mental health as special needs. Yeah. We try not to label our inmates. So that's an important thing. What can you do in the prison or jail system with a master's in, the limits are endless. You can be a therapist. You can work with mental health. You can work substance abuse, especially with masters. You'll notice that a lot of times they hire bachelors, people with bachelor's degrees. So going in with a master's, you're above the others. I'm working as an intern in a rehabilitation center for individuals who have just been released from prison. Do you have any advice as to how to engage individuals in the counseling relationship? Okay. When the inmates, one of the things I talk to the guys about is adjustment disorder. And that's one of the ways that I bring them into the mental health counseling when they get out is through talking to them about adjustment disorder, telling them that, it's not, they may not have a problem, but, they may find out, that they're having a hard time going back into the family system where they've been gone for 10 years and the daughter's now 16, and the wife or girlfriend has been with them has a whole new system, a whole new life, and it doesn't involve them. So talking to them about how they can reintegrate into their life again, that's one way that I talk to them about getting them into the mental health. Plus, I also sneak in telling them that it looks good for the parole officer or the probation officer that you're trying to better yourself and help yourself and understand things that you did. What responsibility do you have as a professional to handle a situation where an inmate is sexually assaulted by another inmate? That's a really good question. As mental health or substance abuse as a counselor, honestly, the only thing that we do is to, well, it depends. If you're a substance abuse counselor, the only thing that you do is report it to the Department of Corrections, the officers. They then take it from there. If you're mental health, then you have a bigger part. You'll go in and do a PREA report on the inmate. You will, every 30 days, you will check on the inmate, see if they're having any issues. You'll see if they're being threatened or pursued again by any other inmates. And if the inmate says that he wants mental health help, then you go ahead and provide it to them. One thing with PREA, though, they have the right to get outside mental health help. Okay, so even though you have mental health within the institution, if the inmate claims PREA and they want somebody from the outside to do their mental health counseling, then federally, according to the federal government, we have to give them that. In PREA, yeah, PREA is automatic if it's inmate on inmate, officer on inmate, even if it's so-called consensual by the inmate. Inmates cannot consent to sex with officers. They are a property of the state that they're in. And if an officer gets caught having sex with an inmate, they are arrested. They are tried as a sex offender, and if found guilty, they have to register as sex offenders for the rest of their life. You mentioned inmates know how to manipulate well. Do you find that you have to be more skeptical when working with inmates, clients, and can you do so while remaining empathetic? Yes. I tell my guys, I'll believe you until I catch you in a lie. Once I catch you in a lie, then you have to re-earn my trust. I tell them right off the bat, from the moment I meet them, don't lie to me. Tell me the truth. I tell them what I have to, what I have to report on, what I don't have to report on. So I instill the importance of them telling me the truth, because I can't help them if they don't tell me the truth. Yeah, I do. I remained sometimes a little bit too empathetic, which is interesting due to the fact that I was both an officer and mental health. So can you check in on them more than every 30 days? Are you talking about, Hannah, you talking about the PREA inmates?
I meant back when you were answering my question about what to do if inmate sexually assaulted another.
Right,
inmate, and you
okay.
said after your, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sure. Inmates have what's called a PREA hotline in their dorms. They have the number. It's a toll-free number. They could call them at any time, 24 hours a day. It goes to the prison administrator, and they go ahead and turn, deliver it down the line to like mental health and stuff like that. And mental health can go check on them. One thing that I've noticed is officers become very lackadaisical when it comes to mental health inmates. And an example of that, and this is something I actually got in trouble for at one point, because the showers in the prison system, in segregation where I was working in Georgia, they have little holes, and you can't see in the cells. Okay, you can't see in, even with the light on, you can't see in. And so I got a phone call to come down to segregation to come down to talk segregation. All right, so I go down to segregation, and I'm talking to the officer for about like 10 minutes. And then finally I was like, well, who do you want me to see? And they're like, well, he's in the shower. Now I'd be getting on them for being in the shower for a while, because you can't see. You can't tell if they're hurting themselves or anything like that. So I go to the shower, and I'm trying to talk to the inmate. He's not responding to me. I called his name again. I kept hearing noises, but no response. I called the officer over. We opened it up, and the inmate was hanging there. We got him down. He was fine. I went on the radio, and I called that we had this situation. Medical came down. We got the inmate to medical. We were under an audit, and the auditor asked me, are there any things, issues that, you should know about in segregation? And I said, yes. And I told them what, and I gave them the example why. My supervisor did not like the fact that I disclosed that. So yeah, I got a little bit of trouble. Do you apply holistic care approach? I don't. I think it's great. Actually, I won't say I don't. I do meditation with the guys. And, at first they laugh or they joke about it. And then after like the second or third time you do it, if you don't do it again or you don't do it another time, they're like, wait, we do, they actually ask for it. So that's really as far as the holistic care that I give. If there's not any more questions or anything like that, thank you. I want to thank, Chicago School. You guys are great. This definitely breaks up the monotony of sitting at home. Wednesday I get to go to a live training. A little leery about that, but so virtual training was great. Y'all stay safe, stay healthy, and if there's any other questions, I had my email. You're more than welcome to email me, or helping mentally ill and prepare for release. Very good, Kira. Yeah, the inmates are they're really afraid to be released, because they don't know what's out there for them. Some of them have been in prison for so long that all their family members have died and stuff like that. There's a program called RIST, RIST, in some states that helps get them together and get them going when they get released. So you guys have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Nirenberg.